Okay, Joe, so let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the genesis of the book. How did you come to be the master of the history of the Fleshtones?
Well, the master part came through work, years and years of work. But the book came about because I was seeing the band. I'd been a fan of the band. I'd seen them since the early '80s, and I was kind of casting around for writing projects in the late '90s. And I thought, what a cool story the Fleshtones are, because as it dawned on me then, there is no band that debuted at CBGB's, in their case in 1976, that's never had a single inactive year. They're always recording, they're always writing, they're always touring, they're always doing something. And that was the late 90s, and it's been that way ever since. And I thought, what a great story of perseverance and sticking to your vision and your work ethic against rising odds and all that. So I caught the band at the Union Bar and Grill in Athens, Ohio, in 1998 or 99, I forget. And I pitched the book idea to them at a table over some beers, and they said, great. Good luck getting it published. Can't imagine who's going to be interested in our story, they said, kind of half joking, but it kind of went on from there. And so starting in 2000, I moved to New York for a month stretch at a time, living in Brooklyn, which was really close to their apartments at the time. And I would work for a month, come back and write in the summer because I'm an academic, and then start teaching again in the fall. And I did that for 4 years up through 2004. And then just kind of nibbled about the book.
How did your family feel about you taking this on?
Well, my wife is completely supportive, will be always, and so she was great. It was definitely out of our pocket, all of it. I mean, it was a labor of love, and then we paid for everything, but that was part of what we just knew we were going to commit to.
Yeah. Were you a little bit intimidated though, and knowing that you're going to kind of write this history of this band, and people are going to be able to go, oh no, that's not right, and oh no, I was there and that didn't happen.
Luckily I wasn't, or if that voice came on, I didn't listen to it too much, because after the book was published, of course, a lot of people came out of the woodwork saying, no, it wasn't that year, it was this year, or no, we weren't there, we were there, or whatever. Nothing major, thank goodness. But I think that if I had led with that, I wouldn't have shut down, but I would have closed off the possibilities, for discovery that I could have made, and I would have been too worried about getting everything right rather than just getting the essence of the story down and then filling in the blanks. Yeah.
So let's talk about the band themselves, because we do have a lot of history to try to put into this. When did they start exactly, and how did they come together?
Well, there were a couple of one-off bands. The Dregs was one in the '74, 20 Flight Rock in a year after that. But the Fleshtones basically started because the guitarist, Keith Strang, who was 19 maybe at the time, and his good friend, childhood friend Mark Pekulski, they rented a house together in Queens, in Whitestone. And they walked down to the basement, and they found that the previous tenant had left behind a guitar and a bass, really cheap equipment. They looked at each other and said, what the hell? And they picked it up and they started goofing around. None of them had really played any instruments at all before, so they just picked up these found guitars in the basement and started jamming, and eventually they recruited a local drummer, Lenny Calderone, from Queens, and Peter Zaremba, a high school friend of Keith Strang's, would drop by to play harmonica, and he eventually brought in the band name, the Fleshtones, and he sort of became the lead singer. But they really started to make music for their basement parties they were throwing. They threw these locally legendary parties in the basement with big vats of Blue Whale, their signature drink.
What's in the Blue Whale? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't remember offhand.
It's gnarly.
It's rum. There's vodka. It's all in just a beautiful...
I was actually kind of surprised it didn't rot the garbage can.
Yeah, that's true. I rotted a lot of things. How it didn't rot the bottom of the garbage cans beyond me. The recipe's in the book, by the way. You can find it.
It is.
Right. And so anyway, they formed the band basically to have music for these house parties that they were throwing. And eventually they grew out of that, and they set their sights higher, and they wanted to play in Manhattan. So they debuted officially at CBGB's in May of 1976. All after finding instruments in the basement and forming to just make some party music, literally.
Yeah. And the Peppermint Lounge became their home base, kind of, sort of?
No, actually,
the Pyramid Club.
Pyramid Club, right. But that was a little bit later, actually. That was in the mid-'80s. They became kind of a resident house band there. But before that, well before that, in the mid and late 70s, they played CBGB's a lot. They played Max's Kansas City a lot. Their real home base, or their earliest home base, was this really great club on St. Mark's Place in Manhattan called Club 57. It's 57 St. Mark's Place, which was the basement of a Polish church, which maybe became sort of a Polish kind of a local recreation center. And they knew the owner who wanted to get some rock and roll shows, so they started playing in the basement of Club 57 a lot, which became a really, really vibrant art scene.
And actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because there's an interesting parallel to that club later in the book. Maybe you could share that story with us.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's one of the great ironies of the book, actually. Gordon Spaeth, who I haven't mentioned yet, he became their official sax player in the late 70s. He was playing with his brother Brian in this outfit called the Action Combo, who would play horns on the Fleshtones records and on stage. He eventually became a full-time member. But the story of Gordon Spaeth is a really sad one because he was a drug and alcohol abuser, a lot of dysfunction and chaos in his home life growing up, and never got a handle on his demons. And he eventually left the band for medical reasons because of his addictions were really taking him down. And later on, years after he had left the band, he was seeing sort of a civic-appointed drug and alcohol counselor, and it turned out that his office was upstairs from the Club 57. 10 or 20 feet from the very basement where he was losing his mind, 20 years earlier, yeah.
And these guys, they persevered for so long without any real fame, but yet they watched all their friends make money and have hits. How did that feel to them?
It was very, very tough, very, very hard. And the real reason I wanted to write Sweat is because I think the Fleshtones is a great story about how you have to redefine success. If you're going to do anything, no matter what your calling is, no matter what your vocation is, if you're going to do anything for really, really long, chances are that you're not going to be rich and famous, obviously. And so if you really want to keep doing it, you have to decide for yourself, well, what does success mean to me? And in the 80s, they saw R.E.M. take off. They saw the Bangles take off. A little bit later, they saw the Replacements take off. All of these kind of kindred spirit bands, among others, that got the hits and the fame and the worldwide tours and the sold-out arenas and all that, and they weren't getting it. They never even really got close. So they had to decide, why are we doing it? We're doing it because we wake up in the morning and that's what we want to do. We want to make rock and roll. And we love hanging out, we love each other, and we love the feedback we get from our fans. And it was a lot of lean years, and we might even say they're still in a lean period, kind of a permanent lean period, really, just depending on how you define things. But they always just wake up and do what they do because they love it. And that's what success means to them.
And actually, that's good advice for anyone. You have to, ultimately, that's why you have to do it. But they ended up being big in France.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, they were touring behind their first full-length album, Roman Gods, in 1981-82. And IRS Records, the great IRS Records, put them on sort of a UK European tour, which the band at the time was really unhappy about because they thought they ought to stay in the States and kind of help break the album in the States. Anyway, they went out to the UK, and when they went to France, they played Paris in 1982. And a year earlier, the Fleshtones had recorded a live show at a New York City radio station. And that hour-long show, which is incredible, by the way, criminal that's not released yet.
Can we find it anywhere?
Online, in the usual shady ways, yeah. That show was broadcast over French airwaves on the radio in 1982 or 81, and the Fleshtones were unaware of how popular that had made them, with a certain rock and roll, rabid rock and roll loving aspect or segment of the Parisian population, which is still there to this day. And they showed up, the Fleshtones did, at this place called the Palace, and it was absolutely packed, sold out. And to this day, the band says it was one of the best shows they've ever played, in part because they were so surprised at the off-the-chart love they got from this crowd. They were unprepared for it. The show ended out in the streets. The crowd came, the police came. They had to stop traffic. It was an absolute just zoo of a show and a real blast. And they've been popular in France ever since.
And another place that you thought might have bring them a level of fame is Peter hosting Cutting Edge on MTV.
Yeah. And it did. It helped their visibility quite a bit in the 80s. That was on every Sunday for a while, for several years. It sort of became the precursor of 120 Minutes and these kind of shows that we know now. And yeah, it helped. In fact, still now you'll see the band booked into this club or that club, and Zaremba will still be credited as host of MTV's Cutting Edge. And it's been how many years? Decades now, since he stopped doing it in the late 80s anyway, in the mid 80s. But that did help raise their visibility a lot, yeah, and got them on big package tours and things. But they never really, they had their chance for mass success in the 80s, and for lots of reasons they missed it, or it missed them, and then they had to begin redefining what success means to them.
Yeah. I was very interested in the book too, to read all the information about cover songs, and I'd love for you to tell us more about why the cover songs, what that meant. Peter was probably the catalyst mostly for that.
Actually, the catalyst in the early days was Gordon Spaeth, the sax player who I mentioned, and his brother Brian. They were tremendous collectors of really obscure rock and roll and R&B and blues, and the Fleshtones were informed by that kind of music from the very, very beginning. The more obscure, the better. That's part of the Fleshtones' ethos, is that they won't cover songs that everyone knows. They'll only cover really kind of obscure songs that they love, kind of the B-side ethos, the flip side ethos of the songs, quite literally, that they grew up with. There's a guy, famous Lenny Kaye, the great Patti Smith guitarist and chronicler, compiler of the Nuggets albums in the 70s. That was the first album to sort of compile these obscure 60s one-off songs. And the band already had all the singles, from these collecting. So from the very beginning, they were into to cover songs that they wanted to kind of attack and get in the middle of and kind of make their own. Because for the Fleshtones, it's not about style or trappings or trends or even genres. It's really just about the essence of rock and roll. And if they find a song, the more obscure the better, that caught it, recorded by some one-off artist who never had another single or never had another hit that no one knows about, then they'll try and cover it and make it their own.
Another great appendix in the book is the set list. You want to break down a Fleshtones set list?
Yeah, well, it's hard to because they're unpredictable by nature. Even tomorrow night's show at the Continental here in Austin is going to be, they'll start with the set list, but there's no telling that they're going to stick to it. I was happy to be able to include those because I caught a bunch of set lists kind of over the decades that they've been playing. They like to build to kind of a plateau and then kick it up slightly more to the very end, to the encore, yeah.
And these guys survived disco, they survived punk, they survived glam, they survived new wave, they survived boy bands.
Right, yeah.
So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but what really drives these guys to stay together?
Well, yeah, it helps that they like each other. I would even say they love each other. I mean, Peter and Keith, the singer and guitarist, have been friends since high school. Bill Milhiser, the drummer, they met in 1980. And Kenny Fox, the quote-unquote new guy, has been in the band for almost 30 years now. He joined in 90, so actually over 21 years or whatever it is now. And they all love each other, and they have to because given the level of their success, they're not going to be flying charter first-class planes. They knock around in a van all year long from this city to that city. They sleep 2 to a bed in hotels still. They crash on the floors of hotels and the floors of promoters, of friends, as they may be doing here in Austin. And so it helps that they really love each other. And they all have a simpatico kind of emotionally and psychologically. And they all plug themselves to the same love of the bedrock source of rock and roll, So that helps a lot. And also, quite frankly, as cliched or as corny as it sounds or as simple as it sounds, they love playing rock and roll. I mean, a lot of bands do, but a lot of bands who love playing rock and roll, who don't make it, who end up facing decades of this kind of itinerant lifestyle that I was talking about, they'll hang it up. They'll do something else to make money. And the Fleshtones, half of them have families that they're supporting, so it's not, they got to go out and make money, and they have to make money other ways as they do. But they just love playing rock and roll. They love getting on a stage and transmitting the essence of rock and roll to a fan, maybe only 2 fans depending on the night, or a packed club on another night, and getting that feedback back from them.
Well, as Peter, I'll paraphrase Peter Zaremba. He said, "People wish the Fleshtones would go away, but we're not going to."
Right. That's kind of a that was one of the last quotes I got for the book in just a conversation with Peter. I thought it was classic, and that's how I end the book because that defines them perfectly. People are going to laugh at us. People are going to think we're not hip, that we're lame, that we're old. All these things, and they say, just go away so we can concentrate on this new band of young, sexy kids or whatever the trend is. He says, no, we're not going to, because even if you want us to, this is what we love to do, and we're going to keep doing it. And there are enough fans around the world who love, respect, and appreciate that, and admire that, too,